My name is Jeffrey Sidoris, and this is Process Driven. In this episode, I'm talking to Nick Mayo, a street photographer from Grand Rapids, Michigan, who's using YouTube and Instagram to build a platform centered around serving the photographic community. He's also having an ongoing dialogue discussing the challenges of making and sharing authentic work. His 2-Minute Tuesdays, for example, are live weekly snapshots of some of the things he's wrestling with, not only as a visual artist, but also as a human being. In this conversation, we discuss the value of revisiting a favorite location again and again, and how being a little outside his comfort zone is exactly where he likes to be. Here's my conversation with Nick Mayo.
Please listen carefully.
Well, and conversation is something that I've wanted to kind of unpack with you, because you've touched on something in the last couple of videos, and it seems that the community of listeners have engaged pretty wholeheartedly and pretty honestly about what you're saying in terms of, and it was really kind of working a scene to having a conversation with that scene and going through levels of the first time you visit a place. You get the big details, right? You get you get the big picture, as it were, and it's only, I think, going through and revisiting a place over and over again, or reshooting a subject over and over again, that you open yourself up to that unseen world that's not readily apparent. And you seem to embrace that by shooting and reshooting and shooting and reshooting around Grand Rapids, where you live. So I wanted to kind of unpack a little bit of that conversation. And when did that sort of aha moment happen for you, that there was value in reshooting and trying to go a little deeper?
It was probably around this time of last year, maybe a little bit more into the year of last year. And Grand Rapids, we're a growing city out here. It's constantly shifting and changing. We have a lot of new buildings that are being built that are taller than the previous generation. So, I mean, it's a growing city, both in size of people and in size of city. But at the same time, it still has this, this slower pace to the city on often occasions. And, I really gravitate towards street photography. I really love going out and capturing, just people in their everyday environment. But at the same time, it doesn't always have, the most thriving and bustling city atmosphere. It's not like going out to Chicago. It's not like going out to New York. So I was struggling at this point in the year of what do I do going into coming out of the winter, going into the year of shooting when we're still in a transition period to where the city's still a little silent on most days.
Hasn't yet fully awakened.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. And I've wrestled so many times in the past with I walk past the same buildings over and over. I walk past the same structures, even sometimes the same people. And it was this aha moment where I was like, for me, and you and I have talked a couple times in the past. I thrive on conversation.
Sure. I
thrive on just being able to dive in deep on subject matter. I'm a deep thinker. I oftentimes get lost in train of thought. And I wanted that to, explode into my work. So as I started moving away from a concept of, working a scene and doing something just for the sake of really pressing into a scene, but then thinking about it in these terms of conversation. And I don't even know where the terminology began. I do know at the time I was reading through some different quotes by Magnum photographers, and I think it was one of these thoughts that led to a thought that led to a thought kind of thing. Sure. And it was, right. I go down many rabbit trails, both in my personal thinking and then in conversations. And but as soon as it hit, I immediately opened up my journal and I just wrote it down in my journal. In over the last 9 to 12 months, it's been really just exploring this idea and allowing it to really bloom out in front of me of what does it look like to actually converse with the things that I'm shooting. And it changed things. I don't want to get too caught up in the language, but at the same time, I do think that oftentimes our language will really direct and depict how we understand the things that we're doing.
Sure.
And this little bit of shift in language really kind of I don't know, opened up a whole new world to where I was able to reapproach the scenes that I had already approached so many times in the past, but wanted to go in deeper, wanted to go in a little bit further. I was listening to and watching interview with Mary Ellen Mark. Uh, I don't know, last week sometime. It was after I'd already recorded the conversation video, and it was scheduled to post up, and I almost wanted to re-record it because of some of her comments. But she was talking about these times to where she had lived in with gypsies, and like so much of her bodies of work were her really submerging herself into these scenes, submerging herself in. She delved in and started living with the subject matter. And it was in that, and she even said, and this is why I wanted to add something of that into the video that I already recorded, but she had said, like, I just want to have an intimacy with these people. I want to be able to share this intimacy that no one else gets to see. And it, you know, for her, oftentimes she was going to the people on the fringe, for the people that were overlooked and kind of marginalized. And I just absolutely love that, sharing an intimacy where typically these people groups, within their people groups, they may have it, but outside of their people groups don't oftentimes find intimacy.
Right.
I don't know. I just absolutely love that. And it's really
what an accomplishment to let her into those
Sure.
situations, you know, a comfort level that I would imagine that she had to bring to the situation where they would trust her, they would open up to her, they would accept her as part of this group.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Are you familiar with John Free?
Yes, absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah.
His Railroad Tramp series, you know, it's exactly that as well. I mean, here's a guy who, for years and years and years, continued to go down to the same rail yards, spending time with oftentimes the same people or a new set of people, but really just diving in and having literal conversations with them, but then also having these visual conversations with his camera in them. And yeah, I just love it.
Yeah. Now, when you made this kind of, you know, aha moment in your journal, can you go back and look at the photographs before and the photographs after and see a difference, or see a difference at least starting to appear?
Yeah, you know, I think one of the things that it did for my photos that I can see is it started to give me, and we had a conversation a while back on a live stream about, you know, the permissions that we get as photographers. And all of a sudden it gave me this permission to be able to catalog the same scene over and over, to dive into maybe even taking the same, you know, photograph over and over until I push the photograph to a place to where it actually has intimacy, you know? And, you know, I think what it did more so than, you know, all of a sudden my work just bloomed out and, you know, I had this whole new sense of weight to it. For me, it at least gives me more of a sense of accomplishment as I look back at it, because I can see the conversations that I have been having. And, you know, one of the things that you and I have talked about in the last couple of conversations that we've had is these creative struggles and diving into creative struggles. And it's given me a little bit more peace walking into the creative struggles, understanding that it's a conversation that's continuously developing, that it's continuously pushing forward. And you know, oftentimes, I don't know if you experience this, but oftentimes it's in, you know, these kind of conversations that you and I have, or that other creatives and us have, that I start to realize a little bit more. And the understanding starts to come through kind of vocally working things out. And I find that happens within my work as well. So I would say that that's probably the biggest difference between my work now and my work back then, is it has more intentionality, but then it also has more room for breathing and knowing that it's heading in a direction.
Well, you mentioned in one of the videos, and I don't remember which one it is, but you mentioned printing out your work and living with your work, and getting a feel for what may evolve into a project or what may constitute a new body of work before you started thinking about this stuff as a conversation. Would you not go back and rework, quote unquote, a subject or a scene? Would you visit it once and let it go? Or was that still there? You're just finding, it sounds like you're finding more purpose in maybe revisiting and diving further into that visual conversation. You know,
I believe that if I think back on my work over at least the last 3 years have been more intentional. 2016 was really when, I mean, I've been shooting since 2010, but 2016 was when I actually started treating this as something that I actually wanted to make, personal projects and all these different things. And I think I was doing a lot of this same thing. I just didn't have the language to put towards it. And sometimes when we don't have the language to put towards it, we don't feel like we have the permissions for it. So it was...
That sounds familiar.
Yeah, sure. Sure. Going back to a scene and reshooting it, I was having this constant struggle of my worth as a photographer before.
Right.
Of going, if I didn't get it the first time, what does that say about me as a photographer? If I have to go back and rework the scene because I wasn't happy the first time around, what is that actually describing of me as a creative?
Yeah, what didn't I see the first time?
Exactly. You start to second guess yourself. You start to question your own creative vision, your own creative direction. But again, it was once I had this language, all of a sudden I realized that it's a progression. It's a constant move forward, and to expect to be able to get to the level of intimacy in the first conversation is sometimes a fallacy as well. Mm-hmm. I think oftentimes, if I'm honest with myself, and I think a lot of people will probably relate to this, is I sometimes expect that I'm going to create the gold the first time around.
Right,
right. I come up to a city like Chicago or New York, and I expect to come back with just the weight of, the Americans or something.
Yeah. And then you beat yourself up for not getting it.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. Last August, I put out a video on the channel called Real Talk. And it was a video that I had recorded right after coming back from Chicago. I had done a meetup out in Chicago, and I went out there and created a body of work for a day. I shot extensively over the city, and I've been to Chicago multiple times in the past, and coming back looking at the work, it wasn't saying the things that I thought I was going to say going into the trip, and it just put me in this like spiral loop downhill to where I was just so creatively depressed and so frustrated. And then I started looking at other works of other great photographers that I'm following, and then that just added some salt to the wound.
Right. See, there's proof.
Exactly.
Yeah. But we forget that that's a curated view of their life's work. We selectively choose to forget that when you look at an Elliott Erwitt book, you're seeing the 120 or so curated, selected, photograph. You're not seeing the 14,000 that maybe got overlooked to get there.
Right.
And we know that intellectually, but somehow existentially, that all goes out the window when we come back with photos that don't say what we wanted to say or what we thought we were able to say.
Sure. And one of the things that I realized from the Chicago trip afterwards too was, as I allowed, and this is going back to your original question about printing the work out and spending time with the work, as I started to print the work out and actually spend time with the work, I realized that I was in the midst of a different conversation with the city than I originally anticipated.
How so?
I can't even, I don't remember at this point what I was expecting going out there. But coming back, I had actually, after spending time with the work, I'd realized that something else had happened within me that was even greater than my work. Was a little bit more surreal at the end of the day. I was looking to do very much standard street photography, and I still gravitate towards that subject matter. I still gravitate towards doing a lot of, photojournalistic style of street photography in cities. But coming back, all of a sudden, I had this surrealist approach to my work to where things were no longer what they seemed. But there was this creative playground that had happened in my mind, and I was having a completely different conversation that I had completely dismissed the first time around, expecting that this other, again, conversation. There's going to be somebody on this episode doing a conversation count. They're going to
every time we say conversation, somebody has to drink.
Yes, this will be the new drinking game. But yeah, and as soon as it took spending time with the work and allowing it to bloom in front of me that I realized, wow, this became something completely different. And now I look back on it and I'm glad that I didn't create the other work that I was going to. I'm glad that this came about, because then that became a voice that started to direct so many other ways that I came back to Grand Rapids or went out to New York and started approaching that subject matter as well. So again, the conversation kind of led into it. If you episode of Barry NX's The Candid Frame that I constantly go back to is Ralph Gibson's episode talking about the point of departure.
Yep.
And I think this is probably two sides to the same coin, which I also think is probably where a lot of this started, because I had originally listened to that episode probably around the same time that I started coming to this understanding.
Interesting. The change that you wrote down in your journal, is that
yes,
around the same time? Okay.
Which I hadn't even put two and two together until this conversation. So again, here we go. But trying to figure out exactly, because, you know, Ralph, I love Ralph. His work has given me so many different permissions within my own work. But sometimes the way that he puts something out there is a little, I don't know. I think he likes to be mysterious in some of the ways that he describes things, and it really makes you have to search and chase and have to figure out, okay, what exactly was he saying in that? And I think that this whole thing has been an exploration of, okay, what was he saying when he was talking about, you know, a point of departure? But it's these little understandings that really kind of launch us in a new direction with our work, launch us in a new direction for our projects and for, you know, exhibitions or anything like that. So I don't know.
When you sit and look at a body of your own work, how do you, and I'd like to go back to kind of the first zine, or the first time that you released a printed body of work into the world, because that's kind of how I came to know your work. Is somebody suggested going and checking out, you know, you should check out Nick's work. He's doing this. In fact, it might have even been John Wilkening. I'm not sure. Yeah, it could have been him. But this idea of approaching a body of work not as a product, although it is a product, but it sounds like you are one of the people that doesn't really look at it as a product as much as a marker for this period in time in your life. Is that fair to say?
That's a good question. I guess I would say it this way. For each project that I put together, I'm really trying to understand a little bit more of myself. And allow other people, because you know, I think we're strengthened when we get to dive in further in our relationships with others and get to understand others in a different way. And you know, I love I'm very extrovert, and I feed off of my relationships with others so much, and trying to put myself into a place of vulnerability and authenticity as we originally started talking. And just putting these projects together that kind of have a fragment of my thought process, a fragment of the way that I see the world, and then offering that to people and going like, I'm consciously trying to avoid using the word conversation at this point, but giving
talk, discussion,
yes,
exchange,
yes, to give a different end of the exchange.
Right.
I need to have a thesaurus open at all times. But does that make sense? I mean, it's me offering this other end of me that hopefully the next time I interact with someone, it'll be strengthened because of that thing. You know, when I go, hey, this is how or, you know, hopefully it'll release that thing into other people. One of the things that I'm actively trying to do is recognize where I didn't have permissions in the first place, and then, you know, actively try and give other people permission in those same areas, because I don't know, as a community, when we're really living within the same community, you know, and I have this very tight-knit group of people around, I don't want to say around Nick Exposed, but that's kind of what it is. I do find that oftentimes we're held back by the same restraints, held back by the same understandings, because we're oftentimes watching the same interviews, we're oftentimes watching the same documentaries, and trying to be able to release not only myself into new areas, but then also the rest of the community, or at least spark ideas for them to be able to be released into other things. So I don't know. I do enjoy using it as a product. I do enjoy putting my zines out there to help fund other projects, to help fund my photography. But I hope what it does is it shares my perspective and releases other people into other perspectives.
When you release something into the world, would you say that you're happy with everything you've released, or do you release something in spite of that because of what it needs to say or what it needs to do? Do you have to be satisfied and happy with the work for the work to be important?
This is the big creative struggle, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly.
For me, when I started giving specific purpose to each of the projects that I'm putting out there, for me, and it's been interesting because I've been watching a lot of interviews about Robert Frank's The Americans and hearing some of the history behind it. People have said walking through, because there's different exhibitions that go around of Robert Frank's The Americans that shows more than just what made it into the book. And and a lot of people, it's very widely recognized that most of the great photographs that he had made in the series didn't make it into the book. Some of the strongest images didn't make it into the book. And I'm going to kind of sidetrack and then I'll come back to answering the question, because I think a lot of this stuff is important, at least in my understanding of how I've been able to release myself from the need of perfection within works. I was watching an interview a while back about drummers, and I'm no musician, but the conversation about Ringo Starr came up. And there's this giant debate, I guess. Like I said, I'm not too far into the music world. I enjoy music, but I guess there's this giant debate as to Ringo's ability to play drums, or whether or not he goes down as the greatest drummer in the face of the planet. And the people that would say that Ringo Starr goes down as the absolute greatest drummer isn't necessarily for his technical ability of being able to play the drums to the utmost standard, although he was a fantastic drummer. It was to the point to where every single time he would play drums, he'd play drums to the benefit of the song, not to the benefit of him as a drummer. And it's this idea of, I started, as soon as I started going into book projects, I was aware enough to know that I need to build a project based around the sum of all its parts, not based around the strength of each of the individual parts. And as I look at my photographs, and oftentimes if I look at a photograph just by itself and I try and judge it based on its merit alone, that's oftentimes where I get frustrated. But when I put it together with other images and maybe even partner a subpar image with a somewhat mediocre image that builds to a greater narrative, I think that that's the importance of building these kind of projects. And it's not in looking at the works and looking at the book projects and going, hey, if any of those were tore apart, they're going to be, my absolute best works. It's going, did I tell the story? Did I answer the question? Did I do whatever it was that I set out to do well? And then I just let it be. It has to have served the purpose that I set out to do, and not necessarily stand on the merit of the images alone, which is difficult at first as you're going through and sequencing and building and working through different images, because you're really drawn to and gravitate towards, and you have these favorite children. But at the same time, at the end of the day, when I look at the projects that I've done so far, they still serve the original intention well. They're the Ringo Starrs in there playing to the song, hopefully, at least in my mind, well.
Do you go into each of these projects with a question that needs answering? Are you defined on what the purpose of each of these projects is at the start, or does that purpose come out, or has it come out in sequencing and assembling and sort of culling and editing the body of work together?
Both end. The most recent zine that I put out, Sketches of Light, this was an intentional effort, knowing where I wanted to take this project. I already had a pool of images that I was going to pull from. It was just stuff that I had shot on my iPhone over the last, year and a half to 2 years. And I knew going into it that I wanted to portray this idea of how my iPhone has really become my pocket sketchbook, has really become my pocket notebook in a lot of ways, and in really these sketches of light and these explorations of composition. So that directed the work. And then the Chicago zine that I did the first time around, the My Kind of Town zine, that was a little bit more, printing all the work out, putting it on the table and going, okay, what's it asking me right now? What's the conversation that naturally emerges from the body of work? Mm-hmm. So it's kind of different per each time, but by the time I'm actually going in and sequencing, I don't start sequencing until I have a specific question or a very, very, very narrowed down specific idea in mind of where I'm heading with it.
It's interesting that you talk about an iPhone as your sketch tool. I kind of love that. Will you go back then, and if you've shot something with your phone, will you go back with either a film camera or medium format, large format, or something else and sort of reshoot that, or do you often let that phone work stand on its own?
This is actually a very, very large mental struggle, and I was thinking about it this morning actually. There's a good handful that I have gone back and shot. If I know that the scene will be there in the exact same way or a very similar way, I do go back and shoot it.
And how often is that shot better than the sketch?
Oftentimes it's the exact same. I have a handful that's the exact same, but the difference is I can bring the latter body of work into the darkroom and make a silver gelatin print, which, whether or not that's more well respected by others or not, at this point in time, it's just something that I enjoy diving into. Mm-hmm. At the same time, this morning I was kind of formulating this idea of putting the iPhone body of work to the test and really just printing it off 11 by 14 or something, and showing it at some spaces here in town and seeing how I feel about it in that instance, because I want to enjoy it. And I often say if I wasn't a strictly a film photographer, I'd probably be an iPhone photographer, because I do love the device. I do love just the way that the imperfections show up in the camera as well on that. You're bound by a very specific set of constraints, and I really do enjoy that. Mm-hmm. So I want to be more approachable to my iPhone shots, but at the same time, I don't get very elitist or very purist on many things. But there's still a big part of me that wishes that some of my great iPhone shots were still shot on film.
Right. Do you find yourself comforted by discomfort in a way that you sort of embrace obstacle or you embrace challenge to kind of push through? Because for a lot of photographers, that idea is difficult. Mm. We sometimes gravitate to what we know, mm-hmm. Either thematically or even technically, rather than push just a little further in one direction or another. Just be a little off balance to see what happens.
Yeah, I know that I thrive in pushing myself outside of my comfort zone, but mm-hmm. I also know that I'm notorious for pushing myself too far out of my comfort zone.
Oh, so
there's these, and actually our last conversation, I walked away from it realizing, man, maybe over the last couple of days I'd been pushing myself a little more outside of my comfort zone that I needed to. There's these points to where, I hit these, just the groove, or you're in the zone. And oftentimes it's when you're 3 steps further outside of your comfort zone than you normally would push yourself. And all of a sudden you're creating new bodies of work and you're creating, and then there comes to be a point to where you set up these gigantic expectations, or at least I do. I set up these giant expectations of where, I think my work could go, the directions that I'm seeing my work. And this is all new, uncharted territory. So for me to start creating these expectations is a lot of wishful thinking. And then all of a sudden, when I don't start living up to the expectations, I've realized that, okay, my thought process has gotten ahead of me. my dreams for this thing is good, but my expectations have been pushed far too far outside of, the realm of reasonable expectations. Or maybe they're not. I don't know.
Do you reevaluate? Do you sort of?
I shut down for a week and cry myself to sleep. I go through these giant ebbs and flows of creative process to where I push myself and push myself and push myself, and then I push myself to a breaking point, and I break. And I go back and I shoot something that's comfortable. I go back and I shoot chairs for a day and a half.
Does the project die then? Or not
at all.
Do you tack the other way and just try and rein it back in to where it's more manageable?
It's a little bit of that. It's tacking a different direction and going, okay, I was on this course. I'm going to be still heading the same course, but I might go at it from a different direction. And then, another thing is the beauty of, again, going back to our conversation is going, there's 7 other projects that I'm in the middle of as well. And I oftentimes find that as soon as I push myself to a breaking point in one, I go and start working on another until I push myself to a breaking point on that one.
Which was interesting for me to learn about you.
Sure.
A lot of people work on one project at a time, or maybe a couple projects at a time. You said in one of your videos, you're 8-10 projects deep at any given moment. Mm-hmm. Do you keep them separate, or do you allow bleed from one to another? Are they so distinct that they can't sort of bleed into one another, or is there overlap?
I think there's plenty of overlap just due to the frame of reference that I have in any given time that I'm creating. It's my brain doesn't necessarily shut off certain parts of my brain when I'm diving into one project versus the next. It's just going, this is the expression in this one, this is the expression in this one. So I don't know. It's one of these things to where, coming from graphic design, when I first started into graphic design, I was originally doing web design, and I enjoyed the process of having both to jump back and forth between. And then I moved away from web design and moved into photography, and then I had both photography and graphic design to jump between. And it was one of these things where it was like, if I'm working on a client project for the design, and I just hit this point of frustration, this point of, just this wall that I run into, then I would jump over and I'd start editing photos, and kind of shift the thought process over. But at the same time, I'm much of my photography is influenced by my graphic design. So it's still kind of one and the same, just a different expression. And that's a lot of how I approach my projects as well.
How dive a little deeper on that? How do you see graphic design informing either how or what you photograph?
So this is, I'll kind of come at it from a different direction. I grew up drawing, painting, working with the utensils there. And then, digital age comes around and I'm building websites, and all of a sudden I was able to compose and build structures and grids and all sorts of different things in a different way. And then I moved over to graphic design, and now I'm able to change a composition, change a design, change everything within dragging and dropping. And then I moved to photography, and now it's just kind of positioning things within a scene. So it's always been the same thing for me, but it's different expressions to where I'm trying to simplify things as often as possible. But at the same time, it's still rearranging elements within a scene. Whereas graphic design, you're dragging and moving, and
sure, you've got more direct control over the scene.
Completely. But with photography, I'm still moving and dancing with the subject and conversing with the subject in a way of trying to, if you look at my work, I'm oftentimes chasing after light and shadow, but it's in a way to where the light and shadow creates graphic compositions, to where it creates, geometric objects.
Yeah. Yeah. And you joke about it, but I love your chair series for that reason.
Sure.
Yeah.
And it's going, I picture my work as these posters. I picture my work as these designs. Like so much of my work I look at and I'm like, man, if I had to go back and create a poster right now, I would use one of my images as the background, because it would lead me into being able to place my type in a very specific way, and I could almost picture this in my work. And it's very, very much influenced by a lot of the structures that I was working within, the different grids that I was working within graphic design. At least I see it. When I look at my work, I think oftentimes my photography is much more design than it is photography. I'm just using the camera as the tool to create the design.
Sure. Does that come through in who you gravitate towards in terms of other photographers?
Subconsciously, it's so funny that, Jay Maisel, I absolutely love Jay's work.
Very graphic in nature.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Joel Meyerowitz.
Yeah.
Joel came from a design background. Jay came from a design background, and I was already gravitating towards these guys' work before having understood that was their background. It was just, I think that it's the same way as when you see skaters that come over and they were submerged within the skate culture at one point, and now they're in the photography culture. Oftentimes you see very same and similar tropes and biases show up within their photography because of their background in history and skating. And I think it's the same way within graphic design. I realize after the fact that a lot of these guys that I've gravitated towards for so long either have a background in graphic design or have a background in painting and in similar kind of shape structures.
Sure.
That I didn't know going into studying them, but yeah,
there's that realization that okay, now I get it. Now I get why this is
Sure.
affecting me so deeply or something.
Oh, absolutely. It's so funny, we've talked about David Duchemin a few times.
Yep.
Amazing guy.
Yep.
And it's so funny that I gravitate towards his work, because there's also this level to where he came from faith in his background. He came from comedy in his background. He came from even doing sleight of hand magic in his background. And all of those things are very familiar across the board for my work.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just kind of funny on how we tend to find the people that have similar histories as us, whether we realize it or not.
Yeah. And as you said, often kind of unbeknownst, it's only when you sort of dive deeper that you go, oh, okay, that makes sense.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
Now I'm connecting that dot,
Mm-hmm.
And David, I think, and I've thought for a very long time that as terrific as he is as a photographer,
Mm-hmm.
it's his writing that
Sure.
is even more effective to me.
Mm-hmm.
And when you pair those two things up, his photographs and then his own writing about what and why and how he shoots, it doesn't get much better for me.
Sure.
So how do you decide then where you go next? Service is a big part of your life.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a baseline of service in your photography that's I don't know, maybe it's obvious to you, but should it be obvious to us as a viewer?
That's a really good question. And one of the things that I've been thinking through lately is most of my work, when initially created, when initially sequenced, or at least the initial concepts, are much more, I don't want to say self-serving, but self-explorative, to where in my actions, I'm definitely very service driven. I created my YouTube channel. I use the tool of Instagram very much as a service to the community, and,
Sure.
and it's very, very intentional there. However, when I have camera in hand, it's much more of a personal deep dive. It's going into trying to discover why it is that I'm gravitating towards the things that I'm gravitating towards, putting language towards the things that get me excited, the things that make me come alive. Why is it that happens? What is it that not only that I'm trying to say, but is being said to me in the act of creating?
Sure.
Later on in the process of making a zine, in the process of making an exhibition, I very much go more of the mindset of serving and going, how is this going to, one, either offer the audience, the viewership, a enjoyable experience, or two, how is this hopefully going to push the bar for, not for my sake, but for the sake of, once again, releasing and giving permission. So that's more along the lines where the service comes in.
So the service is in the sharing.
Sure, absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's also why on my Instagram, I love going through spurts of sharing absolute crap images, and going, I know how effective or how affected I am by seeing others highlight reel, by seeing others curated galleries on their feed, and how oftentimes that puts me in a state of feeling as if I'm, not enough, or any of those different creative struggles, and going, how can I oftentimes share subpar images that hopefully give others courage and strength of going, well, I've looked up to this guy. This is also not me saying that I expect people to look up to me. It's just understanding that people say that they have, and going, if you look up to me, then you also need to know that there's a beautiful side of me that makes absolutely horrible work.
Right.
And that's okay, because it takes Martin Parr says you have to create a lot of rubbish in order to create any kind of, diamonds or gold, or however he says it.
Absolutely. And that's across the board. I mean, writers will tell you the same thing,
Sure.
Stephen King,
Sure.
Bird by Bird. I mean, any number of writers will say you've got to write through the crap to get to the good stuff.
Completely.
And there is something to showing that. I mean, I think that's one of my, if not my top go-to book for photographers, is Magnum Contact Sheets, for that very reason. We get to see these people that we look up to as visual artists, as photographers. We get to see them work through something. We get to see the photos that maybe weren't so good. Or on the other side, we get to see a photo that they chose as their select, and we go, well, wait a minute, I would have chosen number 4.
Sure.
But either way, it's again, kind of coming back to your idea of permission. It's giving us permission to work through and share and have a dialogue with not only the work, but with the audience as well.
Yeah.
Which I think is hugely important.
It's so important. It's so needed. And you have so many people that are constantly striving for this display of perfection, or looking as if they've made it. And if that's our focus, if that's what we think it's all about, then we're lost from the start, and we're going to constantly angst over the work that we're creating. We're going to constantly angst over the lack of subscribers, the lack of views, the lack of hearts, the lack of thumbs up, whatever it might be. And now it's no longer a pursuit of understanding and enjoying a craft. Now it's a pursuit of some sort of celebrity status, and that's the thing that I try and stiff arm for as much as I can within my own photographic career, within my own YouTube career, or whatever you want to call it, is going, how can I be much more authentic? Not for the sake of me, but for the sake of others. How can I allow people to be able to see into my world and see that we don't always have to have it figured out? And if the beautiful thing in my mind isn't necessarily growing subscribers and growing this community and growing all these things for my sake, the beautiful thing is watching it grow, where it's just me sharing all the places that I've struggled. It's me sharing all the places that I've fallen short. And then it's me also sharing some of the places that I've found successes in, that I've found strengths in, and being able to openly and vulnerably put all that out there, and then watching that grow, to me, is a much larger accomplishment in my own life than if I were to try and play it off as if I were some sort of expert, or play it off as if I had it all figured out, or anything in those kind of realm of thinking. So I don't know. One thing that I'm kind of thinking, and I'd like to add just one more thing,
please.
I'm just thinking about the times that I walk through an art gallery, and if we start to think about things in very real terms and we kind of remove them from the superficial nature of social media, we remove them from the superficial nature of likes, and if we were to just sit down at an art gallery and we were to watch how people walk through and express in front of pieces of art, I think we would have a much more real understanding of what's actually happening when people are giving a like or when people are responding, and going, how many people walk past beautiful works at an art gallery and go, hey, I like that, but then they keep on moving. But then you have these things that stop people in their tracks and draw people to tears and have this greater conversation. I mean, I just, as I got a picture of that, that's exactly what I'm chasing after, is not I don't care if people like, and this is one of the things where I don't even think a conversation is successful when it's one that's liked. I think sometimes conversations need to happen that are a little bit more thought-provoking and challenging to concepts and challenging to ideas. And it's going like, if it isn't for that, then why are we creating in the first place? Because if people are walking through art galleries just moving past and treating things as if they were just, Ralph Gibson calls it ephemera, that they just pass right past and give, their 2 seconds to.
It's a mental like. They sort of mentally, we look at it and we go, click, okay, now I can move.
But then when I come across a Rothko and I stand in front of it for 15 minutes and I allow it to impact me and to speak to me and I start engaging with this dialogue, that's what I hope and strive for within my own work. So, and to me, that's what photography is all about.
If you'd like to hear more from Nick, visit his YouTube channel at youtube.com/NickExposed. You'll find him on Instagram and Facebook, also at Nick Exposed. And he's going to be doing a series of meetups, so be sure to check the events tab on his Facebook page for details about what's coming up. Subscribe to Process Driven in Apple Podcasts or in your favorite podcast app. And if you'd like to connect with me, you'll find me on Instagram or Twitter at Jeffrey Saddoris. That's JEFFERYSADDORIS. If you'd like to pick up a copy of my book, Photography by the Letter, either for yourself or a friend, it's available as a paperback or a downloadable ebook at photographybytheletter.com. And I've got a brand new podcast called Iterations. Just search for Iterations in your favorite podcast app or visit jeffreysaddoris.com to check it out. And as always, thanks very much for listening. I appreciate you being here. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you'll come back for the next one.